Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and you've found your way to Kinda Murdery, a place that means more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories, the unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. Hey everybody, welcome to Kinda Murdery. I'm your host, Zevin Odelberg. Thank you for deciding to be here. Now, I know, I just announced a new Kinda Murdery series called American Grifter, which would make you expect to hear about con and flim-flam men and women like Ponzi from our last episode. And here I am, today, back with another murder story. But look, I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you that murderers are often very good at conning people, getting into their confidence, and then convincing law enforcement after the crime that they're in fact innocent. And some of those dastardly core competencies are the same as that of a more traditional grifter. And so, I feel that tonight's story fits firmly into the theme of American Grifter. Without further ado, I present to you the second story in Kinda Murdery's American Grifter series, The Murderous Mrs. Marlyse May. It is time to turn your Marshall stack up to 11. Make like beloved Eddie Munson, and heavy metal. Kinda Murdery starts now. Please forgive me for what I'm going to do, read the note. Did Marlyse May, tempestuous French war bride, really shoot to death her lover Andrew Davolo in apartment 65? What was the grim secret behind this mysterious slaying? And who did it? Those are the questions we're going to answer today. One of the reasons that detective stories have become so popular is that people generally have become evidence-wise. They know that the arrest of a criminal is only half the battle. The other half is conviction and punishment. Writers of mystery fiction dangle through their pages a certain number of suspect puppets and challenge the readers to pick out the guilty one. With the arrest of this man or woman, all other suspects are scrapped. The job of the author's transcendental detective is done, and he retires, covered with glory. Conviction and punishment are polished off in a 3-line paragraph, unless the fictitious murderer has a particularly charming personality, and in that case, he or she is permitted to escape for reasons that fill a page or so. And now, our real murderer and her charming personality is exactly where this story ties into Kinda Murdery's American Grifter theme. But back to detective fiction fans. Educated by the daily papers and news articles and on the web and elsewhere of actual detective cases, modern crime story fans are keenly aware of the many facets that circle around the center point to which the chief suspect is impaled. And I'm sure all of you listening are keenly aware as well. Thousands of mystery fans have sat in jury boxes while murderers have been tried. They realize that in building up an airtight case against the defendant, the police department and the district attorney's office work hand in hand to guard against the possibility that some unsuspected complication may be dug up by the other side, thereby flipping over the whole cart of the prosecution's evidence. And how the forces of the law work to obtain solid structure of evidence is excellently exemplified in our story of the murderous Marlyse May, which centers around a murder committed in the late 1920s. At apartment 65, 1477 Townsend Avenue, the Bronx, New York City. Like the very great majority of murders, this crime had no eyewitnesses, outside of the murderer themselves, of course, and the investigation uncovered confusing trails that gave to newspaper stories the suspense of a mystery serial. In preparation for applying to the grand jury for an indictment against the person who was suspected in the case, the DA reviewed every atom of evidence and interviewed every detective, physician, psychiatrist, and expert who had come in contact with the case, as well as personally talking to friends, acquaintances, business associates of the deceased, and the suspect. By the time this sifting was completed, the DA felt that he had a complete understanding of all the details that went into arguments for and against a guilty verdict. From the human, as well as the legal and medical standpoint, this murder case, which is about to be related to you in detail, was among the most interesting ever to come out of Bronx County. Alright, let's get into it. A loud ringing of the telephone on the night desk at the Highbridge Station House gave the police their first inkling of the tragic murder in apartment 65. The time was exactly 12:05 a.m. on Sunday morning, November 13th, 1927. Lieutenant Phelan, in charge of the night desk, lifted the receiver, listened to an anonymous caller, promised to send a man to the address given, and hung up when the person who telephoned refused to give his name. "That was a squeal about a stabbing case at 1477 Townsend Avenue, top floor, apartment 65, he informed Detectives Winterhalter and Henry Smith, who had come on duty 5 minutes before. "Take a run over and see what's the trouble." Jumping into one of the department's black and whites, the two men were driven over to the scene of the reported crime by Patrolman Gallagher. Within 4 minutes after leaving the station house, they entered the spacious foyer of 1477. The block on which this apartment is situated is not the kind in which stabbings would be expected to happen. The tenants are, for the most part, well-to-do, conservative people of comfortable means and unimpeachable reputations. Ordinarily, after midnight, the houses are as dark and silent as the homes on a suburban street. When Winterhalter and Smith arrived, however, the entire front of the apartment building opposite 1477 bristled with agitated heads, and excited voices shouted from window to window. Buzzing groups in various stages of makeshift costuming surged on the sidewalks, swallowing up any questionable characters who might have been lurking in the neighborhood. But the excitement on the street was nothing compared with that in the hall of the 6th floor, which the two detectives reached by the means of an automatic elevator. "Any of you telephoned the station house about a homicide?" Winterhalter asked the milling mob that confronted them when they emerged from the lift into the corridor. None claimed the civic duty. One little man, whose appearance typified a cartoonist's ideal of Mr. Consumer, volunteered the information that a French girl named Marlyse, who lived in 65, had been shot. Jabbing his thumb on the bell button, the detective held it there until the door was opened by a white-faced, fully dressed woman. The large inner hall was dimly lighted. In the gloom, he saw the shadowy form of a man bending over a lounge on which lay a scantily clad girl. At the approach of the detectives, the figure straightened up, and they saw before them a tall, alert-faced man with keen gray eyes. He introduced himself as a physician who had been summoned by a stranger. "Is she badly hurt?" Winterhalter asked him as Smith proceeded farther into the apartment. "Very," he replied gravely. "At first, I thought she was dead." "If she's as seriously hurt as that," the detective said, "I'd like to get a statement from her at once, if possible." "It's impossible. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's been addressing me as Andy and begging me not to shoot her," the doctor explained. "The sooner I get her to the hospital, the better." Winterhalter learned that 1477 was a new building and that the only telephone that had been installed up to that time was on the 4th floor. Pushing through the crowd swarming in the corridor, he raced downstairs and called up the main desk at police headquarters. He was answered by Lieutenant DeVoe, who told him that an unknown had already notified him of the crime and that the various offices and officials had been notified. These included the nearest hospital for an ambulance, the Homicide Bureau, the District Attorney of the Bronx, the Medical Examiner, the Commanding Police Officer of the district, Captain Bruckman of the Bronx Detective Bureau, and the Photograph Bureau. Within an hour's time, Winterhalter figured, representatives of these bureaus and officials would be on the scene. As this was the first homicide assignment that he and his partner Smith had received, they were naturally eager to win their spurs. They were only third-degree detectives recently promoted from patrol duty, and how they used their minutes before the arrival of their more experienced brother detectives would depend their future connection to the case. If they had made no appreciable progress in that hour, it would be taken out of their hands. Returning to the apartment, Winterhalter was informed by the physician still in charge of Marlyse that the girl had sunk into a coma, so he hastened to the death chamber, where his partner was making a thorough search for clues. "Looks to me like a suicide pact or a murder-suicide that failed," Smith remarked, looking up from a crouching position at the bed. Before answering, Winterhalter took in with one sweeping glance the appearance and condition of the room. It was a good-sized bedchamber, about 11 feet by 16, plainly but handsomely furnished. A shaded center globe light provided illumination. A bed jutted out from the center of one wall, having on each side a chair. Against the opposite wall was a dressing table with a set of costly toilet articles, partly covered with a man's derby hat. Near this dresser was a pedestal with an ornamental doll on it. Between the two windows was a bureau. One window, Winterhalter noticed, opened on a fire escape. Sprawled across the bed was the body of a dead man. His feet, clad in bright green socks and yellow shoes, touched a spot on the floor near a pair of small light brown moccasins. Under one hand lay a pistol, and alongside the arm was a small wooden box. "If that's the man Andy that the woman referred to in her delirium," said Winterhalter, stepping over to the bed and examining the position of the body, Whether or not he shot her, he certainly didn't kill himself. His head's almost blown to pieces. Besides, that gun was planted there after he was dead. Look, Smith, and we'll find out what Winterhalter showed his partner when Kinda Murdery resumes. And we're back. Thank you for taking a moment to support the brands that support Kinda Murdery. I'd like to spend a little time right now talking about causes that are important to me, and specifically, if you listen regularly, it's something you've heard me mention before, but there's a new 3-digit number. It's free. It's 988. And you can dial 988 to immediately receive counseling for substance use, mental health, or suicidal thought-related issues. So if you find yourself in acute crisis, please, please, please remember that the world is a much better place with you in it. And also remember the number 988. Program it into your phone. Call it, where you'll be connected with a caring expert who can talk to you about the struggles that you're facing. And if you're going through a hard time, but you're not in acute crisis, but you would still like to just connect with someone, to share your thoughts, to share your feelings, to have a shoulder to lean on, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, kindamurdery@gmail.com or @kindamurdery on all social media. You can share your story. We can keep it between us. If you'd like me to share it with the community, I will. That's up to you. But again, remember, if you're in crisis, dial 988. If you just need to talk to someone, please do reach out to me. Also, as you've heard me mention many times, it is my hope and goal, and I see it happening, and I'm so thankful to all of you for that Kinda Murdery becomes a community where we all support each other. And in particular, I want to offer emotional and community support to people living with disabilities, physical or otherwise. So if you or someone you know is struggling with a disability, please, again, don't hesitate to reach out to me, kindamurdery@gmail.com or @kindamurdery on all social media. We can connect. We can talk. If you want me to share your story, I will. Again, if you want to keep it between us, we can do that too. But what's really important to me is to provide a community and a forum where people who have life experience that is different than what most of us are used to hearing about, and we all do have those experiences in our own way. So whether or not you have a disability, please don't feel like you can't reach out to me. You can. Please reach out, share. My goal is to share with everyone life experiences, thoughts, and ideas that they may not have thought of or experienced themselves, and hopefully build empathy, connection, and support that way. As you may know, I have cerebral palsy. It's been an important part of my life's journey, and so this is a cause that's very important to me. And speaking of cerebral palsy, a little bit of a segue here, but as you may or may not know, I think I've mentioned it in passing on the show before, in particular when my buddy Nick View was on, but I play the very nerdy card game, but also awesome card game, Magic the Gathering. And I recently found out about a professional Magic player named Brandon Burton. And Brandon Burton is an excellent Magic player. He recently won a GP, that's short for Grand Prix. He has cerebral palsy. Now, he has much more severe cerebral palsy than I do. I know that his mom holds his cards when he plays in a big tournament, but he is absolutely outstanding. Being a Magic pro is like being a chess pro or a poker pro. It's an extremely demanding, difficult, strategic game. Most people are not capable of it, just like most people aren't capable of being a NASCAR driver. Capable of being a pro, I mean. And for someone who loves the game and also has cerebral palsy, Brandon is a very, very inspiring figure to me. This may be kind of a long shot, but what I wanted to say is if anybody happens to know Brandon, if you could reach out to him and let him know about the show, I would love to have him on the show. And on the subject of talking to inspiring people on the show, I have a really exciting event coming up. It's something I've teased previously, but it's now about to arrive. I had the awesome honor and opportunity to interview one of my favorite artists, New York Times best-selling author of the Sandman Slim series and many other excellent books and comic books, Richard Kadrey. I love his work. I eagerly anticipate it. I had the absolute joy of having an in-depth conversation on the show with Richard, and that is going to come out this Sunday, and I can't wait to share it with you. So it will be a slightly different format than usual. What we're going to do on Sunday, I will open with the second half of the Murderous Marlyse May, and then once we've finished the story, the show will transition into my interview with Richard Cadry. So it'll be a little bit longer episode than usual this coming Sunday, but boy, is it worth it. I'm so excited to share this conversation with you, so please do listen, please do tell your friends and family, and get ready, because this Sunday not only will we be wrapping up part 2 of the Murderous Marlyse May, but right after that you'll get to hear my awesome conversation with Richard Cadry. Last thing, please do leave reviews. It makes a huge difference for the show. Go on whatever podcatcher you like to listen on, or on YouTube, and just leave a review. It does a lot to make the show more visible and help our community grow so that there can be more of us to support each other on our life's journeys. Oh, one more thing. I still have those awesome full-color vinyl Kinda Murdery stickers. If you'd like one, please email me, kindamurdery@gmail.com, and I will be more than happy to send them to you. And with that, buckle up, folks, for more of the Murderous Marlyse May. Kinda Murdery resumes now. "If that's the man Andy that the woman referred to in her delirium," said Winterhalter, stepping over to the bed and examining the position of the body, "whether or not he shot her, he certainly didn't kill himself. His head's almost blown to pieces. Besides, that gun was planted there after he was dead. Look, Smith." Winterhalter pointed to the position of the hand. The little and ring fingers were folded on the palm of the hand, grasping 3 long black hairs, and on top of the little and ring fingers the stock of the revolver lay. The middle and index fingers lay alongside the barrel, and the thumb was over the end of the barrel. "I guess it's Andy, all right," Smith said, looking at the business card he'd taken from the dead man's trousers. "Andrew DeVolo, treasurer, Wexelo Realty Corporation, 1457 Broadway," he read. "And you'll find a snapshot on the bureau with Adam, Marlyse, and Andy written on the back." The snapshot referred to showed a merry group which had evidently been snapped during a picnic in the country. The partners then proceeded to make a thorough examination of the apartment together. They found the windows and the dumbwaiter locked. The door leading into the hall showed no marks of having been jimmied, though, as Smith remarked to Winterhalter irritably, "someone of that bunch outside might have come in and closed the windows. Until we get the woman's story, we won't know if the outside door was locked. It's got a Seagull lock, and to open the door from the inside, you have to put your hand upon the brass knob and press in hard and turn it around. Do you think Mrs. May would have been strong enough to do that after she was shot?" Winterhalter replied that he didn't know, but drew Smith's attention to the knob, which had no stains on it, although the wounded woman's hand and bathrobe were saturated with blood. The evidence collected as a result of their search included the following: 2 empty shells found on the bed, 1 bullet up against the wall and another in the ample clothes closet in the bedroom, 6 empty shells lying around the foot of the bed, 1 at the dead man's feet near the moccasins. In the box near his arm were cartridges of the same caliber as the shells. 2 identification cards, 1 which requested the finder to notify Paul M. Adams, president of the International Exchange Corporation, 112 West 49th Street, in case of accident, and the other referring to M.W. Fetterbush, president, Fetterbush Brothers Loose Leaf Company, Inc., 88 Park Place, New York City. A partly filled out application for a permit to carry a gun was found in the bureau drawer. Also, a scrap of a letter evidently written by the woman's husband, which said in part, "Don't worry, Tony will take good care of you." In the kitchen, there was an unpacked hamper of kitchen utensils standing in a corner, and on the table were 2 washed cups and saucers. Bags of oranges and apples were unopened on top of the icebox. By the time the various officials arrived, the pair had finished their examination and done a mighty good job of it. They had overlooked one clue, but then so did the experienced men from the Homicide Bureau. It was an important clue on the bureau in the murder room, almost as important as the weapon itself, and it remained there for days, guarded by the frivolously dressed, simpering doll on the pedestal a few inches away from its hiding place. "I'm not so sure that this is a murder and attempted suicide job," Winterhalter said when they'd finished. "The way that the boy shot up has all the markings of a typical brutal gangland bumping off. He may have been a bootlegger. Bootleggers often describe themselves as real estate men, storage and moving van companies, or leather goods as a blind." But he agreed with his partner that the furnishings of the apartment, the smart conservative gown in the wardrobe, the silken lingerie in the bureau, didn't look as if they belonged to a gunman's mall. They were about to begin questioning the persons who had discovered the wounded woman when Judge John E. McGeehan, District Attorney of the Bronx, came in, accompanied by Dr. Carl S. Kennard, the Assistant County Medical Examiner. The ambulance surgeon had arrived while the two young detectives were searching the apartment, and was engaged in caring for Mrs. May when the new arrivals entered the hall. Almost on their heels came Captain Hop, Detective Paul A. Smersmer, and Detective Inspector Duane of the Bronx Detective Bureau. Detective Donovan and his partner White, who had picked up on a phoned order from police headquarters on a certain section of St. Anne's Avenue where they'd been on a plant. All at once, the death chamber buzzed with activity. The ambulance surgeon examined the body of the man on the bed and pronounced that death had resulted from gunshot wounds, and then carried Mrs. May away to Fordham Hospital. Captain Hop dispatched a uniformed officer to accompany them with orders to notify the station house and the district attorney as soon as she was strong enough to be questioned. Deputy Inspector Duane commended Winterhalter and Smith for the thoroughness and celerity with which they had searched the apartment. Referring to the application for a permit to carry a gun, Detective Smersmer said that Mrs. May had called at the station house in reference to obtaining a permit, but the form on which it was printed had been an old one and not acceptable. "Why did she want a permit?" the district attorney asked him. "She said she'd been threatened by the friends of 3 men she'd charged with robbing her apartment," Smersmer answered. "Detective Snable handled the case. The charge, I believe, was robbery and criminal assault." Mrs. Mabel Lang, a tenant in the house, was then interviewed. She was an alert, intelligent young woman, and her statement was concise and comprehensive. She had returned to her apartment around midnight, she said, after seeing her mother-in-law in the subway. A minute or two after entering her apartment, she had been startled by screams issuing from the outer hall. Cautiously, she'd opened the door and peered out. She saw the body of the French girl who lived opposite her lying apparently dead on the corridor floor, her feet stretched toward the stairway and her head near the elevator door sill. Rushing to her bedroom window, Mrs. Lang had called for help. Ralph Schatzberg responded, as did a physician who had been summoned by someone he believed to be a neighbor. Together, the two men went up in the elevator and found Mrs. Lang standing near the apparently dead woman, awaiting them. Schatzberg, Mrs. Lang, the physician, and all tenants who lived near the death apartment were questioned as to whether or not they'd heard any pistol shots. All declared that they had not. After another thorough search was made of the May apartment, a uniformed officer was left in sole charge with orders to notify the authorities if anyone sought admittance. He was instructed to obtain such a person's name and address, and under no conditions was he to permit anyone to enter. Nothing was to be disturbed in the apartment. For 36 hours, Mrs. May remained in semi-conscious, delirious condition. She alternated between states of coma and wild delirium, exhibiting the greatest terror of anyone who approached her, scratching at attendants and screaming for help. It took 4 or 5 nurses to hold her while the doctor dressed the gunshot wound that had torn through her lung and barely missed her heart. Not once, in her maddest ravings, however, did she admit doing the shooting. The impression made by her incoherent mutterings and piercing shrieks was that Andy had shot her and killed himself. The autopsy showed that Andy could not have shot himself. For Dr. Kennard, who had performed more than 3,000 autopsies, reported finding 7 gunshot wounds, any one of 4 of which would have caused instantaneous death. The first fatal bullet entered 1 inch to the left of the midline of the dead man's skull, passing almost horizontally backward through the brain. The second entered on the vertex of the skull, 1/2 inch to the left of the midline, passed downward and forward, crossed over to the right, and was recovered underneath the outer end of the left eyebrow. The third entered the left temple region, fracturing the anterior fossa, and came out on the right side on a line with the pinna of the right ear. The fourth wound lay on the side of the chest 1 inch below the nipple, passed backward through the heart and lung and stomach, and was recovered just to the left of the spine and the muscles of the back. These mortal wounds, described in detail, would later prove the diabolical ingenuity with which the crime was committed. By gathering a scrap here and there, the various men working on the case from every angle soon presented reports to Deputy Inspector Duane, which gave a satisfactory, if incomplete, history of the friendship between Mrs. May and Andrew Davolo, who had been identified in the morgue by his brother. Mrs. May, when a young war nurse in France, had met a young American soldier named Adam May, who had been brought to her home by her brother to be nursed back to health. The meeting had led to marriage. As a result of being gassed, May developed tuberculosis. The couple came to America, and the young war bride went to work. The record of her success rivals a Horatio Alger story. At the time Davolo was shot, she was earning $135 a week as a dress designer, plus 2% commissions, and had started a small business of her own. Side note, $135 in 1927, $135 a week, is equal to $2,100 in today's money. So, Mrs. May was earning 6 figures, indeed rare for a woman in the 1920s, and rare enough for anyone today. So Mrs. May was earning $135 a week as a dress designer, plus 2% commissions, and had started a small business of her own. Her best friend was Andrew Davolo, 22 years old. When the disease-racked veteran Adam May returned to France in search of a cure, all of his expenses were paid by his wife, whose devotion to him had frequently been commented on by her neighbors and her business associates. Before he left, May begged his friend Andy to see that Mrs. May was not lonely. Outside of this liaison, the dead man appeared to have been a model youth who was devoted to his parents and was already well on the road to success. He had a drawing account of $100 a week in a thriving real estate business he was building up in a partnership with a man named Joseph Wexler. He had persuaded his father to retire from work and enjoy life before he was too old to get any fun out of it, as he put it. In the eyes of her employers, Mrs. May had an equally excellent reputation. She was a brilliant and original designer, very quiet and reserved in manner, and a favorite with her fellow employees. When the story of the double life she had been living broke into print, all were astounded. Joseph Wexler, the dead boy's partner, however, made no bones about expressing the black opinion he had of the wounded woman's character. When the detectives visited him at his home during Sunday afternoon, he didn't hesitate in saying that he believed Marlyse May had murdered Davolo. Ordinarily an alert businessman of jovial go-getter type, Wexler appeared to be utterly crushed by the violent death of his partner.
"Yesterday morning,"
he said, referring to the Saturday preceding the murder,
"Mrs. May called up our office and asked for Andy. I told her he was out, and she left a message for him to see her that night without fail. I gave it to Andy and warned him not to go."
"Well, why'd you warn him?" Winterhalter asked. Wexler's eyes narrowed as he answered grimly.
"There was something in her manner lately that made me fear for Andy's life. One evening this week, he went to a party to which she wasn't invited. She had forbidden him to go. We were driving through Central Park the next day, Mrs. May, Andy, and I, and Mrs. May was reproaching Andy for neglecting her. She was crying and carrying on something awful so that people in the park were staring at us. Andy told her if she didn't stop bawling, he would put her out of the car.
"You can't treat French girls this way. We know what to do."
She screeched hysterically as she said this, and she patted a large pocketbook that was lying in her lap. But she stopped crying, opened her bag, and began making up her face. The pocketbook was gaping wide open while she looked in the mirror, and I saw the butt of a gun. It was after that I first warned Andy to have nothing more to do with her, but he only laughed. He was such a gay fellow. He was always laughing and joking.
Wexler further stated that Andy had an engagement to meet him in New Jersey at 9 o'clock on the night of the murder, and when Andy didn't show up by 10, he'd become anxious. When he called up the boy's parents, they had told him that Andy must be on his way over. The next he heard was of the murder. In the minds of Davolo's family also, there was no uncertainty as to how their boy had met his death. All believed Marlyse May guilty. Mrs. Davolo was prostrated by the tragedy. Nevertheless, over the objections of her daughters, who believed the interview would be too much for her, she insisted upon seeing the detectives. Her bright black eyes flashed, and her small figure trembled with excitement as she declared that she wanted the murderess of her son brought to justice. Without a tremor, she opened the conversation.
"My son. He bring her to me first and say, 'This is a friend of mine in business.' I was of course polite to our guest, but when she left, I say to my boy, 'Is she married?' He say, 'Yes.' I say, 'My son, why are you keeping company with a married woman?' He do not answer. Never has he told me lie. I guess."
She nodded her head solemnly, and her lips formed a tight, thin line.
"I said," she continued, "if you're going out with this woman, keep out of my house. I don't want to have anything more to do with you when I know she is a married woman."
"And then what did he do?" Winterhalter asked.
"For 6-7 months he come home once a week to get change of clothes," she went on in a dead, monotonous voice that had sobs in it. "It break my heart. I grow sick. Then, maybe 7 weeks ago, he begun coming home every night, and we all so happy to have my beautiful boy with us again. Then, last night, before he die, he have his dinner here. No wine. Just tea. We drink with our evening meal. Later, he drive his father and me to the movie theater, and he say, 'Tonight I must go to Jersey on a business matter. Home maybe tonight, maybe early tomorrow.' Next, they come and tell me, my boy is murdered."
Out of consideration for the old lady's lacerated feelings, Winterhalter and Smith questioned her no further at that time. From many other sources, however, they gathered data that showed Mrs. May had been afraid her lover was on the verge of leaving her. All right, we're going to pause our story right there. Please join me this Sunday, October 9th, for part 2 of The Murderous, Marlyse May, and also for my interview with New York Times best-selling author Richard Kadrey. See you on Sunday. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. If you've enjoyed today's Kinda Murdery, please tell your friends and family. Tell strangers. Leave a review. It's the best way to ensure that I can keep telling that special brand of bizarre and terrible tales that you'll only find here on Kinda Murdery.